You wake up in the dark, not because an alarm went off. There was no alarm. There was only the fire, burning low, and the cold air finding the gap in the cave mouth. For roughly 100,000 years, this was simply what morning felt, like on the southern coast of what is now South Africa. No clock, no calendar, just the tide, the light, and the smell of ash. This is Blombos Cave. It sits on a limestone cliff above the Indian Ocean, and it has quietly rewritten what we thought we knew about the first chapter of our own species. The archaeologist, Christopher Henshelwood, has spent decades excavating this single site, and what he found there does not look like the story most of us were taught in school. You were probably told that human creativity switched on suddenly, that somewhere around 40,000 years ago, in the caves of France and Spain, something clicked in the human brain, and art, symbols, and complex thought appeared almost overnight. That version of the story is popular. It is also, according to the evidence from Blombos, wrong, or at least far too simple. Inside this cave, Henshelwood's team found a piece of ochre, a soft reddish stone rich in iron oxide, engraved with a deliberate cross-hatched pattern. It dates to roughly 73,000 years ago. Nearby, they found something even stranger. A small toolkit for processing ochre into liquid pigment, complete with abalone shells used as mixing containers, dated to about 100,000 years ago. Someone sat here, ground stone into powder, mixed it with fat and charcoal, and stored the result. That is not instinct. That is planning across time. Why does this matter? Because ochre alone doesn't confirm symbolic thought. Researchers are still split on this. Some argue ochre was purely practical, used to tan hides, treat wood, or repel insects. Others, including Henshelwood, argue the deliberate patterning and the careful curation of pigment point towards something more. Marking, signaling, meaning. The honest answer is that both can be true at once. A pigment can be useful and symbolic in the same handful of ochre. Let's add another thread to this. 50 kilometers down the coast, at a site called Pinnacle Point, the archaeologist Curtis Marian has documented something else remarkable. Early humans here were harvesting shellfish from the rocks at low tide as far back as 160,000 years ago. This matters more than it sounds like it should. Coastal foraging requires reading tides, remembering exposed rock shelves, and timing a walk down a cliff face around the rhythm of the moon. It is a calendar written into behavior, long before anyone could write. Marian's team also found something else at Pinnacle Point. Small stone tools made from a rock called silkrete, heat-treated in buried fires, so it would flake into sharper, more controlled blades. This kind of deliberate heating of stone for a technological purpose dates back roughly 164,000 years there, according to work led by the archaeologist Kyle Brown. Heat-treating stone is not an accident of cooking. It requires understanding that fire changes rock in a useful, predictable way, and then reproducing that change on purpose, again and again, in a buried pit far from where the tool would eventually be used. That is a chain of cause and effect, held in someone's head, passed to the next person by watching and doing, long before anyone could write a set of instructions down. So let's reconstruct a day. You rise before dawn, when the tide is furthest out. You climb down toward the rocks with a woven bag or a simple container, and you gather mussels, limpets, and the small marine snail called Necerius krausianus. Back at the cave, someone else is grinding ochre on a flat stone, working it into paste. A hearth holds embers from the night before. Children are nearby. You do not know their exact roles, because the archaeology does not preserve play or conversation, but you know they are there, because human groups this size do not function without them. The diet here was not narrow, either. Faunal remains recovered from the Blombos layers include the bones of eland, tortoise, and a range of fish species, alongside the shellfish from the rocks below. That kind of breadth, across land, shore, and sea, suggests a group willing and able to exploit whatever the coastline offered in a given season, rather than depending on one predictable food source. A bad month for one resource did not mean a bad month for everyone. That flexibility is itself a kind of insurance policy, built from knowledge rather than storage. How many people actually lived like this at once, in a single group? Researchers estimate that hunter-gatherer bands during this period were likely small, somewhere in the range of 25 to 50 people, based on comparative studies of more recent foraging societies and on the limited size of many excavated shelters. That is worth sitting with. Most of what you are picturing, the ochre grinding, the shell stringing, the shellfish gathering, happened inside a group roughly the size of an extended modern family gathering, not a nation, not a city, not even a small town. Sleep here was not the soft, isolated thing it is for many of us today. At a cave called Sibudu, several hundred kilometers to the northeast, the archaeologist Lynn Wadley and her team uncovered layered bedding made of woven sedge and rush, dated to roughly 77,000 years ago. Beneath some of those layers, they also found leaves from a tree in the genus Cryptocarya, which contains natural insect-repelling compounds. In plain terms, people were building mattresses and lining them with plants that kept biting insects away. They were periodically burning the old bedding and laying down fresh material on top, essentially housekeeping their sleeping space across generations. This is not evidence of people passively suffering through the night. It is evidence of people actively managing comfort, hygiene, and pest control with the materials the coastline gave them. There is tool work, too. Stone points here show pressure flaking, a technique where a bone or antler tool is used to press off tiny, precise flakes rather than striking them off with force. This produces sharper, more controlled blades. It is a skill that takes years to master, and almost certainly years to teach. Someone had to sit with someone younger and show them, patiently, more than once. Here is the detail that gets me every time. Around 75,000 years ago, people at this cave were drilling small holes into those nacreous shells and stringing them, likely as beads. The shells are small, uniform in size, and many show wear patterns, consistent with being strung and rubbed against skin or clothing over time. This is not a tool. It has no practical use for hunting, cutting, or building. Its only apparent function is to be worn and seen. That is the counterintuitive twist. The oldest confirmed personal ornaments on Earth are not a byproduct of the so-called cognitive revolution in Ice Age Europe. They predate it by tens of thousands of years, and they come from Africa, not Europe. The old model, sometimes called the human revolution, proposed a late, sudden cultural explosion. Researchers like Sally McBrady and Alison Brooks pushed back hard against that framing, arguing instead for what they called the gradualist model, modern behavior emerging slowly, unevenly, across Africa, over an enormous span of time, not flipping on like a switch in one region. This connects to something else. The fossil evidence for our own species is also older and messier than the popular timeline suggests. In 2017, the paleoanthropologist Jean-Jacques Hublin and his colleagues redated fossils from Jebel Irhoud in Morocco to roughly 300,000 years old, pushing back the accepted origin of Homo sapiens by more than 100,000 years and, notably, placing early members of our species across the African continent rather than in one single birthplace. Blombos, then, is not the beginning of the story. It is a chapter deep inside a much longer one, showing people who were already, by any reasonable definition, fully human, doing human things, on a coastline that no longer looks the way it did then. None of this means life here was easy, or that it resembled some romanticized paradise. This was a hard, physical existence, dependent on weather, tide, and the health of your own body. Injuries that we would treat with antibiotics could end a life. Childbirth carried real risk. This is worth stating plainly, and it is also worth resisting the opposite myth, the one where prehistoric people are imagined as brutish, simple, or barely thinking. The ochre kits, the shell beads, and the pressure-flaked points argue against that just as strongly as they argue against sudden invention. It's also worth pausing on something easy to get wrong. When researchers compare this period to modern hunter-gatherer groups like the Juhoanzi of the Kalahari, they are not suggesting these communities are frozen relics of the Stone Age. The Juhoanzi live in the present, with modern lives, modern technology, and modern histories of their own. What ethnographers like Polly Wiesner have documented among them particularly around storytelling, sharing, and social bonds around the fire, offers a useful comparative lens for thinking about the kinds of social behavior that leave no fossil trace, not a window directly into the Pleistocene. There is also an ongoing argument among researchers about whether modern behavior is even the right frame at all, or whether it quietly assumes. European Upper Paleolithic culture is the finish line every population was racing toward. Some scholars now push back on the phrase itself, pointing out that it can flatten very different regional histories into one imagined checklist. Art, check. Ornaments, check. Burial, check. Blombos passes several items on that checklist tens of thousands of years early, which is exactly why it caused so much argument when it was first published. It didn't fit the old map, so the map had to be redrawn instead. So what do we actually know, and what are we still guessing at? We know people at Blombos processed and stored pigment deliberately, roughly 100,000 years ago. We know they made and wore shell beads by around 75,000 years ago. We know they harvested marine resources on a tidal schedule at nearby Pinnacle Point over 100,000 years ago. What we don't know, and may never know for certain, is what any specific pattern or bead meant to the person who made it. Meaning doesn't fossilize, only the object does. Here's what I find remarkable about all of this. The impulse behind that engraved ochre and those strung shells is not foreign to you. It's the same impulse behind choosing what to wear this morning, behind the tattoo on someone's arm, behind hanging a photograph on a wall, instead of leaving it in a drawer. You are, in a very real sense, descended from people who already understood that objects could carry meaning beyond their function. That understanding didn't arrive with agriculture, or cities, or writing. It was already here, on a cliff above the ocean, tens of thousands of years before any of that existed. It's worth being honest about the limits of this comparison, too. You are not living the life of a Blombos forager, and no video can hand you that experience back. Your fire is a switch on a wall. Your tides are irrelevant to your dinner. The insects that once required a bedding of cryptocarya leaves are handled by a screen door. What survives across 100,000 years is not the specific tools or the specific dangers. It's the underlying behavior, the habit of taking a raw material, whether it is stone, pigment, plant fiber, or a photograph on a wall, and shaping it into something that says more than it needs to. That's a strange kind of inheritance, when you think about it. Not a gene, not a language, not even a story passed mouth to mouth across thousands of generations, since we will never know if any specific story from that cave survived that long. It is closer to a tendency to mark, to decorate, to hold onto an object for reasons that have nothing to do with keeping you alive tonight. That tendency is sitting somewhere in the room with you right now, in whatever you chose to wear, to hang, or to keep, without ever really asking why. You wake up in the dark, and somewhere in that darkness is a habit older than language itself. The habit of making something mean more than what it is.